Hello and welcome to Spellbook by the Letters, your weekly look at the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Spellbook in alphabetical order. I'm your host, Brandon Elliott, and this week, like every week, we will be going through 7 spells from the Player's Handbook, and we will be evaluating them based on their usefulness, how often they're useful, and what classes you should really be picking them up on, because not all spells were made equally for every class. Jumping right in, our first spell is Clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is a bard, cleric, sorcerer, wizard spell and reads as thus. Clairvoyance is a 3rd level divination with a casting time of 10 minutes, a range of 1 mile, components being vocal, somatic, and a material focus worth at least 100 gold, either a jeweled horn for hearing or a glass eye for seeing, and it has a duration of concentration up to 10 minutes. This creates an invisible eye, or an invisible sensor within range in a location familiar to you, place you have visited or seen before, or an obvious location that is unfamiliar to you, so as behind the door, around the corner, in the grove of trees, like something that you can see like, oh, it's there, but it's not there. You can't see it, you haven't been there before, but you know that it exists. The sensor remains in place for the duration, and it cannot be attacked or otherwise interacted with. When you cast the spell, you choose seeing or hearing, and then you have the chosen sense from that space. However, if the creature can see the sensor from, like, see invisibility or true sight, they see a luminous, intangible orb about the size of a fist, so it can be detected with those 2 spells. Let's talk about the components first. By the way of the spell, if you want to do both seeing and hearing, I would say that you need 2 100 gold focus components. It has a casting time of 10 minutes, so I'd say there's a lot of like drawing circles and prepping your spell for your components along with a few incantations. I'm not going to do a full 10-minute cast. As for the rating, I very much like this spell, but I will say I am a sucker for this playstyle. I am someone who very much enjoys playing that support role, getting the knowledge for my team, and then giving them that knowledge so that they can act on it. Because knowledge allows you to make better plans and make more efficient use of the rest of your resources. So if you enjoy that scouting support role, this spell is fantastic. Otherwise, it can fall flat. I think that this spell is absolutely better on wizards than any other class. The other classes can make use of them, specifically the cleric, being able to pick it up when needed, and the bard fulfilling that support role. I'm not a big fan of this on sorcerers. But the wizard, specifically the divination wizard, gets the, you'll get a 2nd level spell back each time you use clairvoyance. So you're really getting some supreme slot efficiency out of a pretty useful spell. So that's why the wizard, divination wizard, it's primo on. Everybody else, it's pretty alright. Not a big fan of taking a sorcerer's 3rd level spell slot. And the bard, it's a tough sell, because those 3rd level spell slots are primo for those classes. They're primo for every class, but the sorcerer and bard is just such good options. You can be cute and use it with distant spell with the sorcerer if you need to see something within 2 miles, but I don't think that makes it worth picking up at all. Our next spell that we're going to be talking about is Clone. Clone is a wizard-only spell and reads as thus. Clone is an 8th level necromancy spell with a casting time of an hour. Vocal, somatic, and material components. The material components being a diamond worth at least 1,000 gold, and at least 1 cubic inch of flesh of the creature that is to be cloned, which the spell consumes, and a vessel worth at least 2,000 gold that has a sealable lid, and is large enough to hold a medium creature, such a huge urn, coffin, mud-filled cyst in the ground, or a crystal container filled with salt water. So this spell creates an inert duplicate that takes 120 days to grow, and it can also make younger versions of the same creature. The clone remains inert as long as its vessel remains undisturbed. After the time that the clone matures, if the original body dies, the soul transfers into the clone. You don't get any of your magic items or anything that you had on you, just your soul wakes up in this new body, wherever it is. The original creature's physical remains, if they exist, become inert and cannot be restored back to life. the creature's soul is elsewhere. But you have all of like your memories, your abilities, your class features, everything that you just don't have equipment. For the components, we have the components there. It's an hour-long spell. Half of that is sculpting this like little corpse fetus and like implanting it with what you need to make this corpse probably you. But you can use it on other people. You can't really use it in a doppelganger type situation, simply because if you create a clone of somebody and then kill them, they come into their clone, so you're not going to be able to use it for anything like that. But if your campaign is something that likes to play the long game, and you are a wizard of this level, it's pretty wise to have a clone prepared. You'll want a copy of your spellbook in there, and you might lose some magic items if you die, but death insurance is always a good thing. It also can be used for immortality. Grow your clone into a 20-year-old version of yourself, kill yourself, and then pop out in your clone's body, and you are effectively, you've got another 60 years of life ahead of you. So it can be used for those nefarious ideas as well. There's just, it's one of those things, like, it's an 8th level spell that does cool stuff. This is not a bread and butter spell. This doesn't do a bunch of cool stuff. You're going to cast this once or twice, but on a wizard, that's fine. And having that insurance is great. This is also a great GM NPC spell if you've got an NPC that you want to keep coming back, particularly a high-level wizard or a servant of a high-level wizard. This spell is what allows that to exist, and it's much more a GM spell than it is a player spell, but it exists, and it's fun, and it may not be the mechanical best. It has a very powerful esoteric effect, and that can't be overlooked. Our third spell today is Cloud of Daggers. Cloud of Daggers is a Bard, Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard spell, and reads as thus. Second level Conjuration, casting time 1 action, range of 60 feet, components vocal, somatic, and material, concentration up to 1 minute. Basically, you create daggers in a 5-foot cube. Any creature that starts its turn there or enters that space for the first time on its turn will take 4d4 slashing damage. Let's talk about the components. It has vocal, somatic, and material components. The material components being a sliver of glass. I think spinning that sliver on your finger for your somatic components with a it's time to slice and dice for your vocal components. So, evaluating this spell, I'm not real high on it. The damage is middling, but it is automatic, so that can't be overlooked. It does do automatic damage. It doesn't offer a save. It doesn't require an attack roll. Compare this to the other automatic damage spell that immediately comes to mind in the game, Magic Missile. This damage already gets a better rate than a second level Magic Missile if you hit 2 enemies. If 2 enemies get damaged by it, you've done better than second level Magic Missile. This is a spell that can be very good in one instance, and that is if your campaign does a lot of dungeon crawling. In dungeons with tight hallways, Cloud of Daggers can lock down an area from enemies and do a pretty decent amount of damage, and can be used in tactical situations such as that, and that 5-foot cube small area actually can come in handy to avoid a lot of friendly fire with your damage. But if it's not, that small 5-foot cube, enemies are just going to walk around it. They're not going to walk through it. It's such a small area. It doesn't lock down a large portion of the battlefield, and the damage is 4d4. It's not terrible. It's not great. It's not great at all. And it takes concentration, so that's a pass from me on pretty much all of these classes. Bard, maybe a little bit more reticent to pick it up, just because the Bard doesn't have as many damage options, but I think I prefer Shatter spell. Our next spell is Cloud Kill. Cloud Kill is a sorcerer wizard spell and reads as thus. 5th level conjuration spell with a casting time of 1 action, a range of 120 feet, vocal and somatic components, concentration of up to 10 minutes. You create a 20-foot radius sphere of poisonous yellow-green fog centered on a point you choose within range. The fog spreads around corners and lasts for the duration or until a strong wind disperses it, ending the spell. This area is heavily obscured. When a creature enters the spell's area for the first time on its turn or starts a turn there, they take 5d8 poison damage, con save for half. And creatures are effective even if they hold their breath or don't need to breathe. So it's just contact with this cloud that does that damage. The fog moves 10 feet away from you at the start of each of your turns, rolling along the surface of the ground. The vapors are heavier than air, so they will sink down to the lowest level possible. And you can upcast it for an additional d8 of damage every level above 5th. Like Cloud of Daggers, I'm not a big fan of Cloud Kill either. I don't think either of the spells that start with Cloud are very good. The spell does okay damage for a 5th level spell in that area. 5d8. Fireball is going to outperform it for damage in the same area, but it does have the advantage of heavily obscuring an area and having damage possibilities going over multiple turns. However, Cloud Kill automatically moves 10 feet away from you, and the only way that you can control the direction of movement is by moving yourself around the cloud, which is difficult to say the least, so that it's moving away from you in the direction that you want it to go. So I don't like it. There's too many variables. It's too easy to AoE your own allies. If you happen to be against just a giant army of enemies, sending a Cloud Kill through an army rank is really cool, but how often does that come up? Additionally, it deals poison damage. It's not the most resisted, but it is the least effective damage type in the game. There are 95 creatures in the monster manual that have immunity to poison damage. Immunity to poison damage. 95. And then there are a handful of creatures that also resist it. Even if you take fire, the most resisted and immune element besides poison, it has double the number of immunities as fire, and even if you add up fire's resistances and immunities, it does not match the amount of creatures that are immune to poison damage. It's just, there's so many. And for that, I can't give this spell a high rating. It's a much better spell for the GM side. For traps, Cloud Kill traps are awesome as they roll through the party from a glyph of warding. Or they're awesome when cast by creatures such as the Mesaloth, which is a spellcaster that has immunity to poison damage, and therefore can just pop Cloud Kill on themselves, obscure themselves, hide while damaging their enemies. But from a player perspective, it's not that great. For your components, I think you've got to vape it. You've got to vape it with a check out this sick cotton. I don't actually vapor, otherwise you would have had some sweet, sweet clouds there. I apologize. Our next spell is Color Spray. Color Spray is a sorcerer wizard spell and reads as thus. It's a first level illusion spell, casting time of 1 action, range of self, 15-foot cone emanating from you, vocal, somatic, and material components, a pinch of blue powder or sand that is colored red, yellow, and blue. I think you know what the components are going to be. It has a casting time of an action. It has a duration of a round. And you essentially just blast light out of your hand. Light and colors. You roll 6d10. That's the total number of hit points that the spell can affect. So on average, 33. And creatures in a 15-foot cone, starting with the lowest and then going up until you run out of hit points, are blinded for 1 round. So think of it, if you have you get 3 hit points on your color spray. You have a creature that has 15 hit points, they're the lowest in the spray area, they're going to be blinded. You have a creature that has 20 hit points, 15 plus 20 is 35, that's still within your 40, they will also be blinded. A creature that has 25 hit points, there's no more hit points, there's not enough hit points left to blind them, so they're not blinded, just to kind of give you an idea of how the spell works. And then you can upcast it, rolling an additional 2d10 for each level that you upcast it to add to the hit point total that Color Spray can affect. Guess what? Don't like this spell as well. It does have a few nice things. It offers no save, which is good, but it has short range, and it blinds for 1 round, which isn't bad for a first level spell, but okay, it's a 1-round blind. It can definitely turn early fights, but as your creatures that you're facing start scaling higher and higher hit points totals, and relatively quickly, I might add, it's just not going to get there. I would much rather, even in lower levels, have Burning Hands, which is going to not just blind, it's going to end a creature or two, most likely, or at least advance the damage on them. And Sleep, which, again, has a similar idea as Color Spray, but is greater range. You can be a little bit more surgical with it. And it just drops creatures if you're looking for that non-lethal option rather than just a 1-round blind. Color Spray just becomes irrelevant, and it has short range. Pick up Burning Hands or Sleep, whichever one fulfills the role of Color Spray that you're wanting. If you're wanting the non-lethal option, Sleep. If you're wanting some like an emanation that can turn your fights, pick up Burning Hands. You'll do better by it, I promise you. For the components, though, the one saving grace of Color Spray is for the components you get to go pull that sand and go pocket sand and actually blind people. I cannot even fathom that they were not thinking of Dale Gribble when they wrote the material components for Color. Our next spell is Command. Command is a Cleric Paladin spell and reads as thus. Casting time 1 action, range 60 feet, vocal components, duration 1 round. You speak a 1-word command, and the target must succeed on a wisdom saving throw. If they fail, they're following that command. You have 5 options: approach, drop, flee, grovel, and halt. Then you can upcast it and affect multiple creatures with this, which is amazing. Let's talk about who should be casting it. Paladins, it's solid. Clerics, it's great. I'm disappointed this isn't on the Bard list, honestly, because this is a Bard spell if I've ever seen one. Overall, though, I do like this spell. It's a single target, 1-round, complete disable. It eats an action, at the very least. And you get bonus stuff like you can get a creature closer, you can get a creature prone so all your allies have advantage, you can get a creature drop their weapon or something important that they are holding so you can take it from them. There are just a lot of great uses of Command, and at its base, without the bonus, it's a solid power level pickup. It's eating an entire action from someone. So at the very least, you trade an action for an action, and if you're facing something stronger than you, that's going to be great. If you're facing, for like a 2nd or 3rd level cast of Command, if you're facing a few enemies that might all be facing you, you can command 3 of them for a 3rd level spell. It's just one of those that can easily just give you an entire round in the fight, where the enemies get to do pretty much nothing except what's advantageous to you. And that can turn a fight so quickly and easily. So Command is very, very good. I like the spell a lot. It's probably, out of what we've talked about today, it's my favorite spell. It's the best spell on the list. Clairvoyance is maybe a bit closer to my heart, but Command is, honestly, it's the best spell on the list that we're talking about today. It's so good. For your component, it's literally just going to be one of your 5 options. Approach, drop, flee, grovel, halt. Oh, it's just so forceful and great. Like a paladin commanding is awesome. We have one more spell here today, friends, and that is Commune. Commune is a cleric-only spell and reads as thus. 5th level divination ritual, casting time of 1 minute, a range of self, vocal, somatic, and material components being incense or a vial of holy or unholy water, and a duration of 1 minute. You can contact your deity or a divine proxy and ask 3 questions that must be answered yes or no. And then you must ask your questions before the spell ends, which is fine. And you will receive a correct answer for each question, but deities aren't omniscient. So they might say unclear if they don't know. In the case of where a 1-word answer would be misleading or contrary to the deity's interest, you might get a short phrase instead. It's up to the DM. And then it has like the augury divination caveat, or if you cast this multiple times because it is a ritual spell, there is a cumulative 25% chance that you don't get an answer. So you can't just sit there and spam this as a ritual. So overall, there's no harm in, if you think you're going to need some help that pairing it, it's not going to eat a spell slot, only a spell prepared, because you can ritual this spell, and if you're taking the time to take a minute, you most likely can take the 11 minutes and ritual it. It's not like the difference between an action and 10 minutes, it's the difference between a minute and 11. But this spell it's so dependent on if the DM is wanting to be helpful, because deities aren't omniscient and they might not know, but because it's yes or no questions, you can often get to the point with it. It's a pretty decent concept for a spell. It's pretty solid, and if you're stuck, if you need some answers, having that ability to pray to your deity once you hit 9th level as a cleric, I view Commune as less of a spell and more as a cleric class feature to pray to their deity once they hit 9th level. That's kind of how I view this spell. But yeah, that's 7 spells down. Only a lot more to go. It's been fun, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Your support means a lot. If you liked the episode, if you learned something, go ahead and give it a like. If you take anything I said, if you agree with me, if you just want to chat, go ahead and leave a comment. Please leave those likes and comments. It does help to support the show and give us some visibility. If you liked the episode, share it with a friend. I gotta give a huge thanks to our sister show, Dear Dungeon, which kind of sponsors the show. They're a podcast where me and usually my friend Audrey get on and answer tabletop advice questions and have some fun little middle segments like Dungeons, Dragons, and Dives. These next month or two, I'm going to be having on some fun guests, though. People in the tabletop community guest hosting, while Audrey works on the Spaceships and Star Wars Kickstarter. There's a lot of fun stuff going on, so go listen to the podcast. If you want to hear more from me, if you want to know about what I'm doing in the world of game design, if you want to hear my thoughts on games, follow me on Twitter, The Lost Samurai 7. Feel free to tweet at me anytime. I might reply. I'll reply. And then finally, we're going to talk about a piece of media that a friend is doing. And this week we're going to plug Lose Your Own Adventure. Layermaster, who actually guested or is guesting on an episode of Dear Dungeon that's coming up, does Lose Your Own Adventure on Twitch on Wednesday nights from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Central Time. You can go and listen to Layermaster read some really, really fun choose your own adventure books or D&D game books or anything that like involves reading and making choices. And it's really, really fun, and they're really coming along with the series, so why not go check that out? But that's all that we have time for today. Class is dismissed, and we'll see you next week.